You know, Flannery O'Connor, the 20th century writer, once said that to people who are hard of hearing, you have to shout really loud, and to people whose eyesight is failing, you have to make big gestures. She meant to say that when you're trying to communicate to people, if your audience is hard of hearing, or if they're not paying attention, if they are sort of mentally falling asleep, you have to do something to get their attention, especially if your message is urgent. In so many ways, that's the work of the prophets in the Bible too. They are people tasked with trying to get the attention of the people of God when they have fallen asleep, when they've gotten complacent, or worst of all, when they've used their religiosity and their public displays of piety to cover over the rottenness and crookedness and indifference inside them. We've certainly seen that so far in our study of Amos, our new study for this summer called Good Trouble. We're going to see it again this week as well. So far in our series on Amos, we've taken a look at a couple of different ways that this early prophet who is sent to the northern kingdom of Israel, several things he's done to try and get the attention of the people he's sent to. In the first and second chapters, we saw this really clever move that Amos makes, where he starts calling out the sins of all the surrounding nations around Israel and sort of getting his listeners on his side. You can just imagine those Israelites going, yeah, you tell him, Amos, those people over there are wicked, and those people over there are wicked. And yeah, God wants to punish those people and those people and those people. And then he goes in for the bullseye and unleashes on the northern kingdom of Israel, on the people he sent to speak to, the people who claim to be, who pride themselves on being God's chosen people. And he says, here's the list of complaints God has for you. And it is so much longer and more thorough than the complaints God had about all these other nations around. It's like yanking the rug out from under them. And again, trying to get the people's attention. Then last week, we saw another interesting move where the prophet has this great moment where it's like he's talking to the other nations, like he can get a hold of them on the phone and say, hey, come over here and be my witnesses for God about all the rottenness and crookedness going on inside Israel. So again, appealing to the outside nations and saying, I'm going to have you come and take a look and you be my witnesses at just how rotten things are here, again, among the people who like to imagine or claim for themselves that they are God's chosen ones, and who think that being God's chosen ones means that they're off the hook, that they've got special treatment and they don't have to follow the commandments of righteousness, of justice, of compassion, and of mercy toward others. That's the other thing Amos is beginning to unravel, that the people of Israel and Judah told this story about their identity. We were people God chose when God set us free from slavery in Egypt. And that part of the story was true. That was part of their ancient storytelling. It stretched back for centuries. But over enough time, that got heard as special. Chosen means we get special treatment, not we are held to a higher standard. At its best, the people of Israel was meant to be, well, like the scriptures say, a light to the nations, right? Their way of life, their practice of justice and of mercy, their way of being kind and truthful, their way of life was supposed to draw other people to want to be in relationship with God. Other people would say, I want to live that kind of life. I want our community to look like that. At its worst, though, the people Amos was sent to thought that chosenness, that specialness meant they could do anything they liked and God wasn't going to do anything to correct them or chastise them because, after all, they were the chosen one. So that brings us up to speed, the first through the third chapter of Amos. Now, in chapter 4, Amos does a move almost like what Charles Dickens does in the story Christmas Carol. You know that story, right? Where the primary character, Ebenezer Scrooge, is this greedy, miserly sort of figure, and he's visited by ghosts, the ghost of his former business partner who warns him that his current path is going to lead to doom, and then he's visited, of course, by the three ghosts of Christmas past, present, and future, and at the end of that story, he's forced to see a shadow of what might be if he continues on his current trajectory of life, that not only will poor Tiny Tim Cratchit die, and not only will all the other people in life who were good and decent suffer, but also he sees his own future, that he'll end up dying alone and forgotten and treated like a joke by everybody else who doesn't care about his life. And at this point, Ebenezer Scrooge says to the ghost of Christmas future, is this the only possible future for me? Or are you telling me this? Are you showing me this as a warning so that I might change my way, so that I might be reoriented toward what really matters? And of course, that's how the story ends. It's got to be a happy ending. It's a Christmas Carol after all, right? Where Scrooge wakes up, realizes he's been given another chance, and uses this opportunity to keep Christmas in his heart every day of the year, right? But the point of how that works, right, is Charles Dickens is trying to get attention, get his readers' attention to say, if you're in that same pattern of life, you who think you've been living large, you who think you're this comfortable fat cat, if you've been uninterested in the suffering of other people, if you don't care about the way your nation is falling apart, if you don't care about the needs of the most vulnerable, you're headed toward the same kind of fate as Ebenezer Scrooge. So Amos will say things like, you who imagine yourselves to be the most elegant and sleek, the turn of phrase is, you cows of Bashan. It's sort of like the way of talking about the most elegant and sleek, the best known prime cattle. You who imagine yourselves to be these prime examples of the best, God will treat you like livestock. If you want, God will lead you out like livestock to the slaughter. It's this way of trying to get the people's attention. Again, it works like Charles Dickens writing A Christmas Carol. This jarring image is meant to get people to see their current course of action is headed for disaster. And it will be a disaster of their own making because they've chosen a path that doesn't care about justice, righteousness, and mercy, but instead only cares about keeping themselves insulated and set apart from those who suffer, from getting more wealth and prosperity and comfort. Again, it's a difficult message, certainly in Amos's day and for us to hear as well, but it's a necessary one because it is so easy, especially for us church folk, to hear that because we believe in God, because we believe in Jesus, because we go to church on Sundays, that therefore we're off the hook for how we actually treat other people. And God has never been one to say being chosen or being special means you're held to a lower standard. It means, if anything, you're called to a higher standard to reflect the character of God. In Amos's day, they would have said we're called to reflect the character of Yahweh, the God of Israel, who is just and merciful, who cares about those who are bowed down and lifts up the poor and the needy. For us who are followers of Jesus, we might say all of that, and we're called to reflect the character of Christ, and that no amount of offering public prayers or wearing a cross necklace or having a wall full of cross decorations, for example, gets us off the hook for being people who live out justice and mercy. God will go to whatever lengths are necessary to get that message through to us. And that's what we're going to take a look at this coming Thursday on this week's session of Good Trouble, looking at chapter 4 of Amos. We hope you'll join us in person at 1 o'clock here at Community of Christ, or catch up with these video summary sessions along the way. See you then.